The Horse and His Boy, Chapter 5, called Prince Corin. "My dear sister and very good lady," said Edmund, "you must show your courage now, for I tell you we are in danger." "What is it, Edmund?" asked the Queen. "It is this. I don't think we'll find it easy to leave Tashbaan. While the Prince had hope that you might take him in marriage, we were honoured guests. But by the lion's mane, I think, as soon as he's had your denial, we shall be no better than prisoners." One of the dwarfs gave a low whistle. "I warned your majesties, I warned you," said Salopad the raven. "Easily in, but not easily out, as the lobster said in the lobster pot." "I've been with the prince this morning," continued King Edmund. "He's not used to having his will crossed, and he's very angry with your long delays and doubtful answers. This morning he pressed very hard to know what you were thinking. I put him off, meaning at the same time to diminish his hopes with some light and common jokes about women's fancies, and hinted that his suit was likely to be cold. He grew angry and dangerous. There was a sort of threatening, though only veiled under a show of courtesy, in the words that he spoke." "Yes," said Tumnus, "and when I ate with the Grand Vizier last night, it was the same. He asked me how I liked Tashbaan, and I, for I could not tell him I hated it, told him that now, when the high summer was coming on, my heart turned to the cool woods and the dewy slopes of Narnia. He gave a smile that meant no good and said, 'There is nothing to hinder you from dancing here, little goatfoot.'" "Do you mean he would want to take me as his wife by force?" exclaimed Susan. "That is my fear," said Edmund. "Wife or slave, which is worse?" "But how can he? Does the Tisroc think our brother the High King would suffer such an outrage?" "Sire," said Peregrine to the king, "they would not be so mad. Do they think there are no swords and spears in Narnia?" "Alas," said Edmund, "my guess is that the Tisroc has very small fear of Narnia. We're a very little land, and little land on the border of a great empire that was always hateful to the lords. He longs to blot them out and gobble them up. When first he suffered the prince to come to Cair Paravel as your lover, sister, it may be that he was only seeking an occasion to fight against us. Most likely he hopes to make one mouthful of Narnia and Archenland." "Let's try him," said the second dwarf. "At sea we are as big as he is. If he assaults us by land, he has the desert to cross." "True, friend," said Edmund, "but is the desert a sure defence? What does Salopad say?" "I know that desert well," said the raven, "for I have flown above it far and wide in my younger days." You may be sure that Shasta picked up his ears at this point. "And this is certain, that if the Tisroc goes by the great oasis, he can never lead a great army across it into Archenland. For though they could reach the oasis by the end of their first day's march, yet the springs there would be too little for the thirst of all the soldiers and their beasts. But there is another way." Shasta listened more attentively. "He would find that way," said the raven. "We must start from the tombs of the ancient kings and ride northwest, so that the double peak of the mount is always straight ahead of him, and so, in a day's riding or a little more, we shall come to the end of the head of a stony valley, which is so narrow that a man might be within a furlong of it and 1,000 times and never know it was there. And looking down at this valley, he will see neither grass nor water nor anything else good. But if he rides on down it, he will come to a river, and can ride by that water all the way into Archenland." "And do the Calamines know that way?" asked the Queen. "Friends, friends," said Edmund, What is the use of all this talk? We are not asking whether Narnia or Calaman could win a war if it rose between them. We are asking how to save the honour of the Queen and our lives out of this devilish city. For though my brother Peter is High King, he would defeat the Tisroc a dozen times over, yet long before that day our throats would be cut, and the Queen's grace would be the wife, or more likely, the slave of this prince. We have our weapons, King, said the first dwarf, and if this is a reasonably defensive house. As to that, said the king, I do not doubt that every one of us would sell our lives dearly in the gate that they would not come at the Queen, but over our dead bodies. Yet we should merely be rats fighting in a trap when all's said. Very true, croaked the raven. These last stands in the house make good stories, but nothing ever came of them. After their first few repulses, the enemy always set the house on fire. I am the cause of all this, said Susan, bursting into tears. Oh, if only I had never left Cair Paravel. Our last happy day was before those ambassadors came from Calaman. The moles were planting an orchard for us. Oh, she buried her face in her hands and sobbed. Courage, Sue, courage, said Edmund. Remember. But what is the matter with you, Master Tumnus? For the fawn was holding both his horns with his hands, as if he was trying to keep his head on by them, and writhing to and fro as if he had a pain inside. Don't speak to me, said Tumnus. I'm thinking, so that I can hardly breathe. Wait, do wait. There was a moment's puzzled silence, and then the fawn looked up and drew a long breath, mopped its forehead, and said, The only difficulty is how to get down to our ship, with some stores too, without being seen and stopped. Yes, said the dwarf dryly, just as the beggar's only difficulty about riding is that he has no horse. Wait, said Mr. Tumnus impatiently. All we need is some pretext for going down to our ship today and taking stuff on board. Yes, said the King Edmund doubtfully. Well then, said the fawn, how would it be if your majesties bade the prince to a great banquet to be held on board our own galleon, the Splendour, maybe tomorrow night, and let the message be worded as graciously as the Queen can make, without pledging her honour, so as to give the prince a hope that she's weakening. This is very good counsel, sire, croaked the raven. And then, continued Tumnus excitedly, everyone will expect us to be going down to the ship all day making preparations for our guests. And let some of us go to the bazaars and spend every coin that we have at the fruitiers and the sweetmeat sellers and the wine merchants, just as if we were having a real feast. And let us order magicians and jugglers and dancing girls and flute players all to be on board tomorrow night. I see, said King Edmund, rubbing his hands. And then, said Tumnus, we'll all be on board tonight, and as soon as it gets quite dark, up sails and out oars, said the king. And so to sea, cried Tumnus, leaping up and beginning to dance. And our nose northward, said the first dwarf, running for home. Hurrah for Narnia and the north, said the other. And the prince, waking next morning and finding his birds flown, said Peregrine, clapping his hands. Oh, Master Tumnus, dear Master Tumnus, said the queen, catching his hands and swinging with him as he danced, you have saved us all. The prince will chase after us, said another lord, whose name Shasta had not heard. That's the least of my fears, said Edmund. I've seen all the shipping in the river, and there's no tall ship for war, nor swift galley here. I wish he may chase us, for the Splendour could sink anything he has to send after her, if we were all overtaken at all. Sire, said the raven. "You shall hear no better plot than the fawn thought. We sat in council for days. And now, as we birds say, nests before eggs, which is as much as to say, let us all take our food and then at once be about our business." Everyone arose at this, and the doors were opened, and the lords and the creatures stood aside for the king and the queen to go out first. Shasta wondered what he thought to do, but Mr. Tumnus said, "Lie here, your highness, and I will bring you up a little feast for yourself in a few moments. There is no need for you to move until we are all ready to embark." Shasta lay his head down again on the pillows, and soon he was alone in the room. "This is perfectly dreadful," thought Shasta. It never came into his head to tell these Narnians the whole truth and ask for their help. Having been brought up by a hard, close-fisted man like Arshish, he had a fixed habit of never telling grown-ups anything if he could help it. He thought they would always spoil or stop whatever you were trying to do, and he thought that even if Narnian King might be friendly to two horses because they were talking beasts of Narnia, he would hate Aravis, and because she was a Calamine, and either sell her for a slave or send her back to her father. And as for himself, I simply daren't tell them I am not Prince Corin now, thought Shasta. I've heard all their plans. If they knew I wasn't one of themselves, they'd never let me out of this house alive. They'd be afraid I'd betray them to the Tisroc. They'd kill me, and if the real Corin turns up, it'll all come out, and then they will. He had, you see, no idea of how noble and free-born people behave. What am I to do? What am I to do? He kept saying to himself. What? Oh, hello, there comes that little goaty creature again. The fawn trotted in, half dancing with a tray in his hands, which was nearly as large as himself. This he set on an inlaid table beside Shasta's sofa, and he sat down himself on the carpeted floor with his goatee legs crossed. "Now, Princeling," he said, "make good dinner. It will be your last meal in Tashban." It was a fine meal after the Calamine fashion. I don't know whether you would have liked it or not, but Shasta did. There were lobsters and salad and snipe stuffed with almonds and truffles, and a complicated dish made of chicken livers and rice and raisins and nuts, and there were cool melons and gooseberry fools and mulberry fool and every kind of nice thing that could be made with ice. There was also a little flagon of the sort of wine that's called white, though it was really yellow. While Shasta was eating, the good little fawn, who thought he was still dazed with a little sunstroke, kept talking to him about fine times he would have when they all got home, about his good old father King Loon of Archenland, and the little castle where he lived on the southern slopes of the pass. "And don't forget," said Mr. Tumnus, "that you are promised the first suit of armour and your first war horse on your next birthday. And then your highness will begin to learn how to tilt and joust. And in a few years, if all goes well, King Peter has promised your royal father that he himself will make you knight at Cair Paravel. And in the meantime, there will be plenty of comings and goings between Narnia and Archenland, across the neck of the mountains. And of course, you remember, you have promised to come for a whole week to stay with me in the summer festival, and there'll be bonfires and all-night dances of fauns and dryads in the heart of the woods, and who knows, we might see Aslan himself." When the meal was over, the fawn told Shasta to stay quietly where he was, and it wouldn't do any harm to have a little sleep. He added, "I'll call you in plenty of time to get on board, and then home, Narnia and the north." Shasta had so enjoyed his dinner and all the things Tumnus had been telling him that when he was left alone, his thoughts took him to a different turn. He only hoped now that the real Prince Corin wouldn't wouldn't turn up until it was too late, and then he'd be taken away to Narnia by ship. I am afraid he did not think of all that might happen to the real Corin when he was left behind in Tashban. Then he was a little worried about Aravis and Bree waiting for him at the tombs. But then he said to himself, well, how can I help it? And anyway, that Aravis thinks she's too good and to go on about me, so she can jolly well go on alone. And at the same time, he couldn't help feeling that it would be much nicer to go to Narnia by sea than toiling across the desert. When he had thought all about this, he did what I expect you would have done if you had been up very early and had had a long walk and a great deal of excitement and then a very good meal and were lying on a sofa in a cool room with no noise in except when a bee came buzzing in through the wide open windows. He fell asleep. What woke him was a loud crash. He jumped up off the sofa, staring. He saw at once, from the mere look of the room, that the lights and the shadows all looked different, that he must have slept for several hours. He saw also what had made the crash. A costly porcelain vase, which had been standing on the window-sill, lay on the floor, broken into about 30 pieces. But he hardly noticed all these things. What he did notice was 2 hands gripping the windowsill from the outside. They gripped harder and harder, getting white at the knuckles, and then came up a head and a pair of shoulders. A moment later, there was a boy of Shasta's own age sitting astride the sill, with one leg hanging down inside the room. Shasta had never seen his own face in the looking glass. Even if he had, he might not have realized that the other boy was, at ordinary times, almost exactly like himself. At the moment, this boy was not particularly like anyone, for he had the finest black eye you ever saw, and a tooth missing, and his clothes, which must have been splendid ones when he put them on, were torn and dirty, and there was both blood and mud on his face. "Who are you?" said the boy in a whisper. "Are you Prince Corin?" said Shasta. "Yes, of course," said the other. "But who are you?" "I'm nobody in particular, I mean," said Shasta. "King Edmund caught me in the street and mistook me for you. I suppose we must look alike. Can I get out of the way you got in?" "Yes, if you're any good at climbing," said Corin. "But why are you in such a hurry? I say we ought to be able to get some fun out of being mistaken for one another." No, said Shasta. We must change places at once. It'll be simply frightful if Mr. Tumnus comes back and finds us both here. I've had to pretend to be you, and you're starting tonight, secretly, and where were you all this time?" "A boy in the street made a beastly joke about Queen Susan," said Prince Corin, "so I knocked him down. He ran howling into a house and his big brother came out, so I knocked the big brother down. Then they all followed me until we ran into 3 old men with spears who were called the Watch, so I fought with the Watch and they knocked me down. It was all getting dark by now. Then the Watch took me along to lock me up somewhere, so I asked them if they'd like a stoup of wine, and they said they didn't mind if they did, and then I took them to a wine shop and got them some, and they all sat down for a drink, and then they fell asleep. I thought it was time for me to be off, so I came quietly, and then I found the first boy, the one who started all the trouble, still hanging about. So I knocked him down again. After that I climbed up a pipe onto the roof of a house and lay quiet till it began to get light this morning. Ever since that I've been finding my way back. I say, is there anything to drink?" "No, I drank it," said Shasta. "And now show me how you got in. There's not a minute to lose. You'd better lie down on the sofa and pretend. Oh, but I forgot. It'll be no good with all those bruises and a black eye. You'll just have to tell them the truth, once I'm safely away." "What else did you think I'd be telling them?" asked the prince, with a rather angry look in his eye. "And who are you?" "There's no time," said Shasta in a frantic whisper. "I'm a Narnian, I believe, something northern anyway, but I've been brought up all my life in Calaman, and I'm escaping across the desert with a talking horse called Bree. And now, quick, how do you get away?" "Look," said Corin, "drop from this window onto the roof of the veranda, but you must do it lightly, on your toes, or someone will hear. Then along to your left, and you can get up to the top of that wall if you're any good at a climber. Then along the wall to the corner, drop onto the rubbish heap, and you'll find the outside, and there you are." "Thanks," said Shasta, who was already sitting on the sill. The two boys were looking into each other's faces, and suddenly they found they were friends. "Goodbye," said Corin, "and good luck. I do hope you get safe away." "Goodbye," said Shasta. "I say, you have been having some adventures." "Nothing to yours," said the prince. "Now drop lightly, I say," he added, as Shasta dropped. "I hope we meet in Archenland. Go to my father, King Loon, and tell him you're a friend of mine. Look out, I hear someone coming." And that's the end of the chapter.